It's really incredible that we're still seeing Alistair Campbell being given like prime-time TV slots, given what we know about the dodgy dossier and the what precipitated the Iraq war, right? It's incredible this man has a shred of credibility left. Do I hate everybody on this panel? Anand Menon, I don't know who he is, because I've never watched anything to do with UK and a changing Europe, so, you know. But he's in a think tank, though, so I'm predisposed already to dislike him.
Good evening from Clacton-on-Sea in Essex. Welcome to our panel, welcome to our audience, of course, and welcome to you at home, and as always, we're on social media. Now, I wanted to start, first of all, by telling you a little bit about all of you, about our audience here this evening. And as I said earlier, all of you voted to leave the EU back in 2016. Now, clearly, some views have evolved since then. And so to reflect that, and in consultation with the BBC's polling expert, Professor Sir John Curtis, nearly 70% of you still believe that Brexit was the right thing to do, though you have a variety of views on how Brexit is working so far. About 20% of you would vote differently, if asked now, and about 10%...
I mean, you're absolutely right, Lumpy Blue. The fact that there are very few young people on this panel, people who are actually going to be mostly affected by leaving the European Union, are the ones who are not being represented here, like actual young people. You're absolutely right, Lumpy Blue, in that criticism.
Right. Let's take our first question from Jane Field.
How much is the cost of living crisis down to Brexit?
John, kick us off.
Well, it's not at all. The cost of living crisis is something which has hit the United States of America, the United Kingdom and the European Union countries. Some of the other European countries have considerably higher inflation than us, well into double figures. Others now have inflation a bit below ours. I think our price control system on energy has held up the fall in inflation, which should be coming quite soon. And I think it was a direct...
But how much worse is inflation in the UK compared to the Eurozone and the US, right? You know, you can't say, well, it's affecting all of them. Well, how much is it being affected by them, right? What's causing the inflation? You know, these are different economies and different particular situations, right? You can't just say, well, it's inflation, it's all the same thing.
Dreadful mistake by the three major central banks of the West. I think the Federal Reserve Board, the Bank of England and the European Central Bank all made the same mistake. They printed too much money, they bought up too many bonds, they depressed interest rates too far for too long, they created a money and credit explosion, and that filtered up. They now tell us it was about the war in Ukraine, which undoubtedly hit energy and edible oil prices for a bit. But of course, if that were the true explanation, they have to explain why Chinese inflation today is 0.2%, and why Japanese inflation and Swiss inflation is just a bit over 2%.
But as far
so
as
there was a different way of central banking which didn't give you the inflation.
As far as James...
Make it a central bank issue and then compare it to Japan, who have been throwing money into the economy. They've been absolutely burning through banknotes at the Japanese central bank, massively inflating the money supply. And yet, where's the inflation coming from in Japan? They've been waiting for their inflationary spiral for 30 years, and they've not had it, despite the fact that they've been printing money like nobody's business. You can make these claims all you want, right? But you cannot deny that trade tariffs that have been instituted post-Brexit are going to push prices up, right? You've added an additional cost on the supply end that's going to get passed on to consumers. That's not a difficult concept to be able to wrap your head around, even if you are pro-Brexit, right? And as Bilderberg points out in chat, yeah, China is getting oil from Russia. All that oil that's now left the European markets, because we're not buying the Russian supply and only buying the Norwegian supply in places from the Gulf, whatever it is, right? Our supply is lower to meet the same demand, so the prices go up. Basic inflationary theory. Whereas China, they have the whole world to be able to trade with, because they're happy trading with, they're happily trading with Venezuela and Saudi Arabia and Russia all at the same time to be able to get their oil on the cheap, right?
But what we've seen is 13 years of a pretty neglectful attitude towards public services, towards the government, towards integrity and running this country properly. So when people are now looking at their mortgages and they realise that they're going to have to be paying the best part of £3,000 more every year to stay in the same house, they're very angry. And the cost of living crisis that we've seen so far is nothing compared to what is about to hit very many families in this country. So How much of that is Brexit? How much of it is a chaotic government? I think it's very difficult to disentangle.
That's another problem with every Labour candidate who comes on. They'll just say, well, actually, the real issue is that the blue team are in charge and the blue teams did the bad things, which, to be fair, the blue team did do the bad things. But Labour are standing on a platform of promising to continue to do the bad things, right? The idea that we can pigeonhole the crisis we have now into the specific period of the start of the pandemic until today, rather than 13 years of austerity, 45 years of neoliberalism, right? This is a knock-on effect of so many different poor economic decisions for, as I said, for 45 years, really and truly. And so, I mean, to be fair, Blair is probably the least to blame out of all of this. Cameron probably the most to blame.
Because the government left the EU in the way that it did and got the bad deal that it got, things like our food and drink manufacturers are crying out for a better deal because they want to be able to trade without having to fill in one set of forms over here, another set of forms over there. The whole point of Brexit, as I remember, was about getting rid of some of this red tape. Actually, we've doubled it for a lot of our manufacturers, and food and drink is our biggest manufacturing sector in the UK. It's a really, really important industry for us, and it directly impacts the prices that we're paying at the till. So there are...
if you're talking about specifically food manufacturing in the UK, then that's not a Brexit issue, right? That's an energy price issue. That's a cost push inflation from the increase in energy prices being pushed onto consumers to maintain profit margins.
Things that have happened because of Brexit. But I think now what we're seeing actually is a penalty after 13 years of Tory government.
Well, I mean, what I'd say first and foremost is the cost of living crisis is not driven primarily by Brexit. It's driven, and it was started by international factors, the war in Ukraine, the tail end of COVID. That's why it's hit the whole of Europe equally. But I think it's hard to argue that Brexit hasn't had an impact and made it slightly worse than it wouldn't have been for at least three reasons, I think. One, the devaluation in the pound we saw after the referendum has made imports more expensive because the pound went down, and that fed into inflation slightly. Secondly, making trade more difficult, which Brexit did, is also going to have an impact on prices. And thirdly, ending free movement has meant that labour shortages that are there for a variety of reasons, a lot of them to do with COVID, have again been slightly exacerbated. So Brexit isn't the main cause, but it's certainly an element that accounts for some of the cost of living crisis.
I think it's hard for people to understand that Brexit can't be causing a cost of living crisis when me, as someone who runs a business, is being directly affected by the rise of import costs and the costs of getting IT equipment, for example, which is what I predominantly sell, into the UK, is becoming more difficult and more expensive, and that I'm having to pass them expenses on to my customers, and that's part of the cost of living crisis.
And is that something that you expected to happen?
We didn't forecast it as bad as it has been. When COVID hit, everything went down in price and things were picking up really well for us. And now we've come out of that. The import fees have gone up again, and it's really difficult to get past the red tape that's in place when we've got all of our stock sitting in the Netherlands and sitting in Belgium, and lead times are higher and everything's just generally more expensive. And we, as a small business, can't compete with the big players such as, the high street shops that... I
have a friend, right? I have a friend who runs a Magic the Gathering buying and selling business, right? And he voted for Brexit because it'll be good for his business. And he literally sells vast majority of his cards on the European card market, right? The vast majority of his sales go to Europe. And he thought, I know, let's vote for Brexit because I think that'll make me more competitive as a business who's selling on the European market. And I'm just like...
In 2016, we were told we were going to be 350 million better off on the side of a big red bus. We're now asking people who still believe in Brexit to say, prove it hasn't got any worse. I don't see any benefit from it all.
So the way you're phrasing that question, I'm assuming that you would vote differently now.
Very much so.
And just tell me why that is.
I don't see any benefit. When I look back at the government that we had then, and I look at David Cameron and who was involved then, and now I look at the government that we've got now, I look at, Boris Johnson, Nadine Dorries, Jacob Rees-Mogg, that type of government, I've got no faith in them.
Okay.
What's interesting as well, Flying Rodent brought this up on Twitter. Brexit was one of those situations where the political class, who were unified in their support of remaining in the European Union, were first time in a very long time they've been faced with being completely opposed by the UK press. Right, the right-wing press in this country were absolutely adamantly pro-Brexit, and the political class didn't know what to do. They didn't know what to do when they didn't have the papers on their side anymore. It's really interesting to look back on an under scrutinised aspect of the Brexit referendum, where the papers were on the side of the public rather than the politicians, which is an interesting thing, interesting dynamic that I underexplored.
No, I think that the point you're making there, and the point that the gentleman there has made as well, you were lied to. I'm afraid you were lied to. You were told that it would be pain-free. You were told that it would all be upsides, no downsides. You would be told that getting a deal would be easy, that it would be straightforward to leave. You were told that we'd get the money on the health service. And lots of the things that you were told would happen. Yeah,
literally, of all the people to be out here saying, well, actually, no, lying is really bad, and you were lied to, and lying is something that we should be discouraging in politics. It's the architect of the dodgy dossier. This guy could literally write an entire dossier on lying, couldn't he?
Such as a trade deal with the United States have not happened. And lots of the things that you were told wouldn't happen have happened. Anand mentioned the loss of 10% in the value of the
you were told that they could deploy weapons of mass destruction.
pound. We've not recovered from that. You were told there'd be more investment. Investment has flatlined. We were told it would be a boost to productivity. Productivity has flatlined. Trade.
Well, investment and productivity had flatlined before Brexit, Alistair. Let's not twist the truth here. Again, it's just, he would just call it spin. But productivity is just as bad now as it was before Brexit. Likewise with investment. It's almost like investment is led by state intervention, and you can't just guarantee global private investment in an unproductive economy.
And I hear the story that this gentleman just told virtually everywhere I go, particularly from small businesses, who are drowning in red tape. And I'm afraid that, look, I understand why a lot of you guys voted for Brexit, because you felt that Johnson, Farage, these con men were coming along, offering you something that was going to make your lives better.
You, Alistair, and the political class who thought that you had the belief of the public were in no position to be able to think that that was the case, right? You were complacent idiots who didn't understand the public were massively disenfranchised with everything that you had to offer after 20 years of deindustrialization that you helped precipitate. And they're now going, oh, well, the people were uninterested in what the political class had to say and therefore moved towards an alternative. He can't even examine his own fucking failures. The sad part about all of this is he's just not wrong. He's not wrong that they were lied to. He's not wrong that people like Farage and Johnson promised the sunlit uplands that were never going to exist, right? None of this is incorrect. But what you can't do is speak, as is pointed out in Chan, a patronising tone to people who firmly believe in something that, I can see the reason why they would in Brexit. There are some upsides, mostly downsides, but there are some upsides. There's ways you can run the economy post-Brexit I think would be in the public interest. The kind of Lexit position I think has some merit to it, even though I wouldn't support it myself. There's no empathy at all here. And he can't recognise his own failures. And because he's not in the position to be able to have the moral high ground on this one, there's an obvious retort, which is, yeah, you can't accuse me of them of lying. You're also a liar. And he can't represent his own failures. It has to be some kind of fifth column influence, just distorting people's perceptions of the reality that he inhibits.
What they thought of Brexit. And all but two said they would vote to rejoin the European Union if they had the chance. That is a future that I'm afraid, I think this government, and I don't blame you for voting, I blame them for lying to you. They lied, they've not been properly held to account. Johnson's gone for lying about COVID. He's still not properly been held accountable for Brexit. And we're all of us paying a higher price in our cost of living and everything else because of the lies that we were told.
The cost of living crisis has absolutely nothing to do with Brexit.
Well, even when you hear the man there who's running using it in an IT business.
Well, let me address that point straight away. If Brexit was responsible for any greater difficulty in trade, you would expect the trade between the United Kingdom and the European Union to have diminished quite considerably since we left the EU, technically left the EU. Actually, last year, we exported more than we've ever exported to the EU, £340 billion worth of exports. Sadly, we also imported more than we'd normally import, which was £432 billion, and the trade deficit that we ran with the EU last year was exactly the same level, pretty much, that we'd run for many years before the pandemic. And that trade deficit, ladies and gentlemen, is much worse for the pound. The trade deficit being 92 billion last year. That trade deficit is much worse for the pound than us leaving. That trade deficit is bleeding.
The trade deficit is made worse by Brexit because of the tariffs. If we have to import things at the same rate as we were before Brexit, and the costs are higher because there are trade tariffs, then you're literally blaming Brexit by talking about the trade deficit. What the fuck are you talking about?
We're having to sell pounds to buy foreign exchange, to buy European goods. Actually, the problem with Brexit is not that Brexit's caused problems, it's that we haven't properly Brexited. And I will agree completely, wholeheartedly with Alistair when he says that the Prime Minister was loose, at least in his association with the truth, when he promised to get Brexit done. Because what he said to us, and it's on page 5 of the Conservative Party manifesto, was that the country would leave the European Union as one united kingdom, that we would take back control of our laws, our borders, our cash, and our, did I say laws? And our laws.
I mean, yeah, we are out of the European Union. Just because Northern Ireland has some single market access, that doesn't mean that we are still in the European Union. When he says that we were going to, leave the European Union as a whole, what he's talking about there is the Windsor Framework, the Northern Ireland Protocol, as it was previously known. What he's referring to is the fact that there is a framework where Northern Ireland has access to the market and some ECJ jurisdiction to be able to maintain the sanctity of the Good Friday Agreement. He thinks that that's not a real Brexit or not the UK leaving as one whole. No, Northern Ireland is left. Just because there's some ECJ jurisdiction and because they have some market access, that's not the same as being an EU member state. He's talking nonsense. In the same way that if we had left the European Union with a customs agreement, like was proposed during the meaningful votes, by, I think it was Ken Clarke and another Labour MP who joined together to make the customs union amendment to the Brexit deal, that would still be leaving the European Union. And it doesn't matter if some parts of it are in that and some parts of them are not. Unless Northern Ireland had just stayed in the EU entirely, the point he's making here would make sense, but it doesn't make sense because we haven't.
Just answer Lewis's point. Lewis is saying it's made his business more difficult. You're saying, no, it hasn't.
I mean, the evidence...
I mean, that's the reality for him.
No, it isn't. I mean, the evidence...
Well, he's just said it.
The evidence is there numerically with the benefit of hindsight. You can someone can fact check me.
Okay, so speak directly to Lewis then.
No, so if you look up the government website, it will tell you that last year we exported more than we exported before the pandemic to the EU. 340 billion, we imported 432 billion, and roughly the trade deficit was what it has been for years.
All right, let's let Lewis answer that.
So that doesn't change the import costs because of the tariffs. Ben, I know he's not an idiot, right? I know I dislike him and everything he stands for. He's not a moron. He's just he's just lying like Boris Johnson would. I say lying. He's being economical with the truth, because he's not actually saying a specific lie, but he's lying with facts, which is something that smart politicians would do all the time.
Sorry, just one thing I wanted to come back on. It was the mention of the pounds and things like that. It's the pounds and the pence that matter to my customers, and the savings that I have to pass on, I can't do anymore because of the very red tape.
I haven't addressed the actual question. So,
well, I just want you to address Lewis, because Lewis is saying it's made his business more difficult. You're saying, no, it hasn't made business more difficult.
Lewis, it may have made your business more difficult. Yeah. It may have done. And, of course, there'll be anecdotal evidence of that in a lot of businesses. Okay. But clearly, overall, it hasn't had that impact.
Can I just check that? So, Anna, can we just... Because when I looked into level of exports and imports from the EU, different people take different views about whether it's gone up, it's gone down. What are the facts in this?
I mean, there are government figures on it.
I mean, there are several things to say. Firstly, yes, trade hasn't performed as badly as I think some people thought pre-Brexit it would. But the crucial thing is, if our trade hadn't been as affected by Brexit, we would see our trade performing like that of our nearest comparators. And what has happened post-COVID is there is a gap between our trading performance and theirs because theirs has gone up significantly more. And it's very hard when thinking about that to think that's anything other than...
No, but Annan...
Okay, I'm going to let other people come
Just on Ben's other point, it seems curious when you're talking about we didn't leave properly. I mean, Lewis there is saying there is red tape. By leaving properly, as you say, you're adding tariffs onto that red tape. You're making his life harder and more expensive.
I would just like to say back to Ben, the thought that always arises, it's literally the first thing that you say that people with your opinion say. It's like Brexit could be good if it went to a different school.
No,
I'm so sick of that.
Not at all.
No, hang on.
I mean, he's not wrong, right? Again, Ben Habib is not wrong. He didn't get the Brexit that he wanted, that a lot of the right-wing Brexiteers like Nigel Farage, what they wanted out of Brexit, which was an absolute trashing of all the EU laws, an absolute, ruination of our workers' rights to create the Singapore-on-Thames style, post-neoliberal, deregulated state, right? That's what they want. They want to become the sweatshop of Europe, right? They would definitely benefit from that. Would the country as a whole benefit from that? I mean, no, I wouldn't. But then again, these people are fundamental believers in, neoliberal economics. And they would want to, as far as they are concerned, push that as far as the envelope would go. And they were constrained by the European Union's laws. So they had to as far as they were concerned, they had to go to make sure that their economic ideology could be put to the test in the UK. Politicians like Ben Habib or John Redwood, for example, they have a fundamental ideology and they believe that would be prosperous for people, right? Again, I fundamentally disagree, and, the evidence shows us that this shit doesn't work. But at least that's what they believe, right? I fundamentally have a little bit more respect for these people because, they feel disheartened by the fact that what they wanted Brexit to become was never what happened. Because, of course, the main public doesn't want this. The public wants state investment. They want their workers' rights protected. They don't want the banking sector deregulated. They don't want any of this stuff. They don't actually believe in the Singapore-on-Thames stuff. There's a bunch of other factors why they voted for it. Things like sovereignty, things like immigration, which are far more pertinent to the Brexit argument than the ultra right-wing libertarian experiment that Ben Habib and Nigel Farage want to do. Which is why it never happened, because it was never politically feasible for any party to do it. So we end up with this middling Brexit mess where we've not, really got what anybody wanted out of it.
Hi, since Brexit, are we now worse off? Are we broken Britain? And what party will grow a backbone and stand up and fight for us and put great back into Britain?
Okay, let me hear one more.
Make Britain great again, folks. Put the great back into Britain. That's going to be I bet that's going to be a slogan for one of the parties in the next election.
One more point. The man here in the front.
So, just going back to the original question of, is Brexit the cause of the cost of living crisis? I have to agree that I think COVID was definitely partly to blame for the cost of living crisis. But it seems strange to me that whilst everybody can't afford bills, people can't afford to buy food, people can't even afford heating bills, that the only people actually benefiting out of anything rising in price is the government, because it's percentile. The income for the government is percentile.
In terms of taxation?
In terms of...
Have you ever considered that maybe the energy companies are benefiting from this? Maybe the banks are benefiting from this, right? You might consider maybe that there are profiteers who are benefiting from this, which we have seen from the data on what's causing inflation at the moment, right? Profit seeking, right? Greedflation that has an economic basis to it. But we're not just going to mention the energy companies' record profits here, are we? There's not income into the equation of this guy?
Are we yet to see any Brexit dividends due to interference, incompetence, or just pure execution? Or, in fact, were we deceived?
And can I just ask you what you think, Sean?
I want a professional opinion, I'm afraid.
Oh, OK. I'm sure you must have an opinion, but all right. I will go around the panel. Alistair, let's kick off with you.
Yeah, I mean, look, I accept the point about sovereignty. Lots of people voted for that. And I'm not saying that... I was addressing the gentleman who was asking why things have not worked out as he thought they would. And the answer is that the people who led that campaign told a lot of lies. And having told those lies, they're still lying. Now, I would actually argue, though I've got a bit, at least these two have got the guts to come and face questions, unlike the government, I would at least agree with their passion in the belief and what they think Brexit could do. But I really do think that until we properly hold to account people who directly lied in the democratic debate and admitted it. You listen to Dominic Cummings, who actually ran the campaign. No, but he ran the campaign. Johnson was his little puppet, and he ran the campaign. And I think that whether it was them telling you that Turks were coming in, which was a lie, whether it was the 350 million on the bus, whether it was the trade deals that they were going to do, they knew when they said that they weren't. They wanted to get out on whatever basis and then deliver a Brexit that none of them could define. None of them had a plan for what Brexit actually meant.
I can easily define Brexit. It's easy as pie.
Well, do you want to answer the question, though, Ben? And maybe you could do it when you're answering the question.
Yeah, it's leaving the European Union, which we've done. Okay, brilliant. We've Brexited. Right, let's move on. Okay, case closed. Program over. Let's move on, folks. Nothing to see here.
But the question is, are we yet to see any Brexit dividends due to interference, incompetence and pure execution, or were we deceived?
Well, we absolutely haven't seen the Brexit dividends we should have seen. And that is because we haven't properly Brexited. When we signed the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, what Boris Johnson signed up to was non-regression on state aid. These are really important policy points. State aid, competition, employment and environment. We are not allowed to regress from EU standards, such as they were on the 31st of December 2020, including, ladies and gentlemen, a commitment to net zero. So if we want to get off net zero and we want to address the cost of living crisis by using our natural resources that we have in abundance in the North Sea, we can't do it because of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement. And if Lord Frost disputes that, which he has done in public, I ask you to go to pages 201 and 202 of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, where it's all laid bare. Okay. We are hitched at the hip to the EU, and that's why we haven't got the dividends.
Okay.
Because we can't deregulate, we can't cut taxes, we can't put...
Yeah, exactly. He wants to regulate, he wants to cut taxes, he wants to become Singapore on Thames, and people don't want this. It was never politically possible to do this. I don't know what Ben thinks, right? There was some kind of massive mandate for the deregulatory nightmare neoliberal hellscape that he so clearly wants, right? This was never going to happen. British people do not like this. They are fundamentally economically left-wing, right? As much as people will be crazy to hear this, right? This is why the Conservative Party never destroy the NHS. It's why, they will always crumple for the demands of the public, because they fundamentally want to win elections with a population that are against their core political principles. And they're against Ben's core political principles as well. So this Brexit that he wanted was never going to happen, ever. It was never politically possible.
2016 was the only lie. There was no intention or expectation from David Cameron that we were actually going to leave the EU. There was a huge campaign, far bigger than the Leave campaign, government, leaflets, etc., media, celebrities. So there was no expectation we were going to leave. And the result came in, we're leaving. Then we had 3 years of frustration from people like Mr Campbell, most of the MPs on both sides, trying to frustrate the process. So we had another election 3 years later in 2019, a massive vote. This is about disconnect from political parties and voters. Okay. We had a massive win. After that, no chance.
I mean, I don't think 52-48 is a massive win. I mean, it's a massive political win, right? In terms of scale of the change. It wasn't the scale of public opinion. It was pretty close. It's pretty close. Let's be real here. But he's fundamentally correct that it is indeed, as I mentioned at the top of the programme, it is about a disconnect between politicians and general people, because there was a united political front that was broken through by a popular discontentment with the body politic at the time. And this is the problem. This is the problem when you have a panel where there's no left-wing case for Brexit being made, right? All this is left versus right. That's all you've got is two sectors of the right-leaning Leave campaign and the left-leaning Remain campaign battling with each other. There's no left-wing Brexiteers, and there's no right-wing Remainers either, right? Where's Anna Soubry representing the Conservative Remain camp, right? Or Bella Warsteiner? Where's Eddie Dempsey representing Labour Leave? Nowhere, right? We have two right-wing Brexiteers and two left-wing Remainers and one centrist Remainer. There's no proper landscape of different political opinions to be able to discuss this issue. And we have the issue is that the right-leaning people of this country are being slighted by a left-wing Remain establishment, when that's fundamentally not the case. But Eddie Dempsey, as I said, I think he would be the perfect candidate because he literally led the leftist Leave campaign, but didn't get enough of a platform because the Electoral Commission specifically had the official Leave campaign as Leave.eu and Be Leave, right-wing pressure groups for Brexit at the time. There was no official leftist pro-Brexit position as far as the Electoral Commission were concerned.
I need to say to Mr. Campbell that I have, throughout my sweet life, been lied to by the elite politicians that we have elected for whatever reason.
Right, so a plague on all their houses, you're saying.
I beg your pardon?
Now, I know there are people in the audience who have changed their mind about how they voted and did feel deceived. I haven't heard from them yet. We've heard from people who feel that we haven't had a proper Brexit, but... Oh, so we heard from one, but I want... Forgive me, sorry. But let me hear from a couple more voices. I want to make sure I get a range of views. Also, people are still a bit undecided. So, yes, you presume no one in the pink top there. Yes.
Well, I believe that the majority of the 17 million that voted for Brexit were for genuine reasons, for the underlying principles about our sovereignty of Parliament. It wasn't because of a political slogan on the side of a bus.
And do you feel the question is...
benefits, apparently those benefits have never actually materialised anyway. You know, the forecast of a saving of 10 billion, and that was actually downgraded by the Institute of Fiscal Studies to about 5 billion a year. In the context of the national health budget of 400 billion, it was never going to make that difference anyway.
Okay.
What is interesting is this audience as well, right? This particular constituency, I think 53% of the constituency are over 50. It's interesting looking at the difference in the kind of ideological precepts behind why people voted in the way that they did, especially between the generational divide. And the most young people favoured the utility of the economic basis for remaining in the European Union. And the right-leaning people fundamentally believe in the kind of the nationalist principle of parliamentary sovereignty. They don't really care about the material benefits or material lack of benefits with regards to that, but the fundamental principle, and he's right, they did believe in the principle of sovereignty of Parliament. Not that I think that extricating yourself from the EU necessarily gives you any more sovereignty, for example, but, you know, it's interesting to think about that kind of different relationship between the reason why people voted in the way that they did.
And there's also people who are still undecided who think it's too soon to say who. Yes, the person there in the green top.
The problem with Brexit is that it was meant to be everyone's Brexit, whether you're Labour or Conservative, and the problem with it was moulded in the Tory right, so no Labour's views got included in that process. I think it would have been better to have everyone come together to make a Brexit for everyone, but it was just...
So true. Exactly what I was saying at the top, right? Exactly what I was saying. Where is the Lexit? Where's the Lexit support? Where is even any faintest idea there might be a left-wing case for this? As I said, this isn't even one I particularly agree with, but I can see the merits and I can see the reasons why people would support it. But it's never been part of the national dialogue at all, right? It's been left versus right. It's been liberals versus conservatives. Leftists shut out of the conversation yet again. And this audience member is 100% correct that, you know, the only case made for Brexit was from a right-wing perspective. That was the biggest weakness in the Lexit argument at the time. Tory government would be listening to UKIP, but not any Lexit campaign. Well, exactly. I mean, that's one of the best reasons against any kind of Lexit campaign was like, well, you can vote for it if you want, but you're leaving it in the hands of the Tories to be able to finalise how that works. You're not going to get what you want. Lexit only would have been possible under a totally different government and in a totally different media landscape. That's the fundamental problem it had to overcome, and it was never going to happen without first addressing those two things. Yep, agreed, but both very relevant points.
I mean, I think, to answer your question, Sean, I think the things that people thought they were going to get haven't happened. So most people that I speak to who voted for Brexit thought they were going to get great economic growth, investment in public services, amazing trade deals around the world, definitely thought that immigration would be easier to control. None of that has happened. Now, that doesn't mean that this country is going to go to hell in a handcart because we're not in the EU. I do not believe that. I think we have a wonderful future ahead of us. And yes, we can put the great back into Great Britain. That anybody who wants to be in government should have that as their aim. We've got a great future. But what you cannot have is this kind of mess of a government who are more concerned about peerages for their mates and partying during lockdown and then lying about it. They're spending far, far more time on those things than they are on fixing the deal, getting us in the Horizon programme, sorting out some of the problems that they've caused in our relationships with our nearest neighbours, because whatever you think about Brexit, you've got to get on with your neighbours, right? Because you want to have a good trade arrangements with them. And if you have good trading relationships with your nearest neighbours, you stand a lot better chance, and if you stick by the deals you made as well, by the way, and don't go back on them in a matter of months, stick by your deals, you've got a much, much better chance of getting those good trade deals with people like the Americans in the future.
Hello. With an election looming, what should the two main parties have as their Brexit strategy?
Right, so let's look forward.
Thank you.
Go on then.
OK, I mean, I think looking forward, as Fiona just said, is sometimes what we're failing to do when we talk about Brexit. And it's all about reliving, was I lied to, was this or that true, was there a promise, and was that promise being delivered? And I just think, really now, in 2023...
Requisition the oil fields. Take the oil back. That's the answer to the question. Sorry.
After everything we've been through with COVID, that looking forward is what we have to be doing. So
well, let's do it then. So the question is, there's an election, we get that point, and I think that's exactly the point Josh was making. So there's an election looming. What is the Labour Brexit strategy?
What we need to do is to make Brexit work, because we have left the EU, and the Labour Party is not going to have another referendum. It's not going to take us back into the EU.
OK, have a policy. Would you like to actually explain the things you're going to do, not the things that you're not going to do?
We're not going to be joining the single market or the customs union. I'm so sorry, Alistair. I know this is breaking your heart.
Jenny, in fairness, what are you going to do? And I will.
Well, I'm explaining. So it's. But
you're saying what you're not going to do, but what are you going to do?
That's very important to be clear about that, because I know that there will be people here tonight who have doubted that, and I think the clearer we are about it, the more you can hold us to it. Should we win the next election?
So what would you...
God, Labour's messaging is so bad. What are they doing? Oh, my God. They could have got anybody on this programme, right? They knew that loads of people will be watching this programme. They've got somebody who can't even fucking speak, let alone dictate potential policy. Maj was so right when we got him on the programme that Labour's, unity of message is so terrible. It's so bad. It's so slapdash. And they continually just... flail around being asked very simple questions which require very simple answers, and the only answer is just, we will do the good things and not the bad things. It's the only answer you get from all of them. It's pathetic. Have a strategy, have a plan, have policies, and stick to them. Oh my God.
You say, for example, to Lewis over there, who's having problems with his business?
When we say make Brexit work, we have got to fix the holes in this deal.
True, it is very hard to be consistent when your manifesto is in constant flux and you don't plan to keep your promises anyway. Very true, Rohak, very true.
So that is things like the veterinary agreement, it's things like Horizon, it's things like professional qualifications, it's getting rid of the red tape that Lewis was talking about earlier, because this is the reality now. We are outside the EU. We've got to make it work. We can make it work. We can.
And how confident are you that the EU will play ball with that?
Well, I don't think the EU is sitting by the phone waiting for us to call, if that's what you mean. But there's no reason why the EU wouldn't want to discuss with us, to talk about things where we think there are problems with the deal that we could fix for mutual benefit. I think this idea that if the EU is doing well, we must be doing badly, or for us to do well, the EU must be cross with us. I think we've got to get past all that and realise that, the reality...
There was a reason why this woman got absolutely fucking annihilated by Mick Lynch on the BBC Politics Live, because she hasn't got a clue. She hasn't got a clue what she's doing. Honestly, she has not got a clue what the hell she's doing.
The reality is that we can all do well. And if they're doing well, that's good for us. If we're doing well, that's good for them.
OK. Now, John, as you...
So nothing. You've got nothing. You've got no plans. No plans. We'll potentially renegotiate a deal, maybe. That's it. That's all we got from her. Fantastic. Brilliant. Love it. I feel reassured. Do you feel reassured, chat? Do you feel reassured that the Labour Party have your interests at heart with regard to the way in which they're going to be managing Brexit and making it work moving forward? I'm certainly reassured.
We don't have a government minister on the programme, but the question is, what should the two main parties offer as a Brexit strategy? So you're a Conservative, so you'll You'll do.
I hope to influence the manifesto, and I'm bursting with ideas on how we take advantage.
But what
of
do you think?
nominal
What do you think
opportunities
the government
being an independent country
should offer as a Brexit strategy?
I think they do need to go back to their agricultural subsidy regime. I think it spends too much money on stopping people farming, and it should spend much more money on creating much more great British food. We've got a food shortage and dear prices. I think people like to buy more British food. Let's use our subsidy intelligently to promote really good British growing. I think we need to make sure we do get more of our own fish and land them here and in British boats, because our fishing industry was badly shrunk during its time in the common fishing policy. I want that off a lot more.
I mean, a lot of the fishers have actually said that Boris Johnson lied to them about that kind of shit, and Farage lied. They feel like they've been sold down the river. And actually, the common fisheries policy wasn't as detrimental as everybody says that it was.
All things with domestic energy, an obvious one, because energy is too dear. We weren't allowed to do that. I want the VAT threshold on small business raised from 85,000 to $250,000. We weren't allowed to do that. There are a lot of small businesses that literally close down when they get to 85,000. We need to expand their capacity. I want to see us take advantage of the taking back control of our borders to have an immigration policy that meets more people's wishes, because as we've seen tonight, the current one isn't quite hitting.
And there you go. Someone asked, what's Labour, what the Conservatives are going to do? The Labour representative says nothing but good things. The EU wants us to do, we'll also do good. John Redwood says, here are like 5 different policies that I think are going to be really good, like potentially, to make our country better. I can't comment on the veracity of whether those policies are going to be good or not. Subsidies for homegrown food seems fine to me. Making small business more profitable in defence against large corporations seems fine as well. I don't know why these are Brexit dividends and rather than just general fiscal policies, but, you know, I'm not going to quibble if he says some things that are coincidentally correct.
I think it's really interesting that we're talking about taking Britain forward, possibly parallel to or in opposition to the EU. Really, we should be talking about where our position is in the entire world and working to actually work with all of the world, and that's why we don't have a trade agreement with the US, because A, we had Trump, and B, we had Boris. So it's never going to work. But in terms of the rest of the world, we can be market leaders, and I think we've mentioned that our service industries are exceptional, but that also needs to waterfall down into the local communities and make sure that things are underpinned. And the very idea that people that are on universal credit are just enjoying themselves is absolutely ridiculous and disgusting.
The woman there, further back. Yes, you've had your hand up for a while.
Oh, hi. I'd just like to say I totally endorse, Mr Redwood, what you've said about VAT for small businesses, because I think at the moment we're on the threshold of a lot of businesses going out, small businesses, which just cannot carry on for another quarter. And I think the VAT needs to change as a matter of urgency.
OK. Anand, what's, in your view, what should the Brexit strategy be from whoever forms the next government?
Well, I'm afraid I think the Brexit strategy will be to say as little as possible about Brexit, because both parties have manoeuvred themselves into a position where they don't want to talk about it. So I think that's what we'll get. I think that's a shame, because what both parties should do is be honest. What we've not had in this debate about Brexit from the start is any honesty about trade-offs. And there are legitimate trade-offs. If you want to be in control of your laws and your borders, that's fine. The problem with that is that Lewis is going to face red tape, because unless you're in the single market, there are going to be impediments to importing things from the European Union. It's perfectly legitimate to say, I choose the red tape. But what I would like to have 7 years after that referendum, are political parties willing to say, here are the trade-offs. This is how we will play that trade-off, and this is why. Because then at least we can have an honest debate and be straight about what Brexit means and what we're going to do about it.
OK. We haven't got long, so you're going to be reasonably brief. Forgive me. Alistair.
Look, first of all, I think John did a very good job there of saying what John Redwood has always believed would work for a British economy, and he's done it consistently his entire career. I do think it's worth pointing out that at a time of this anniversary, 7 years on, at a time of a cost of living crisis, not to have somebody from the government here is utterly scandalous and is a shame. And I think it's an insult to you. And I'm not going to speak about we know what the Conservative strategy is, even if they don't. But I do think for Labour, I desperately want Labour to win. They kicked me out of the party for being a bit too extreme on Brexit, in their view. But
yeah, you vote for the fucking Lib Dems, mate.
The only thing I'd say is there's a famous ice hockey player called Wayne Gretzky, and he said that what made him a great player was that he always skated to where the puck is going and not where it was. And I just feel we're here in Clacton. 20% of you have changed your mind, 10% of you are thinking about it, and those children I saw this afternoon, they all want to keep the option open that one day we will regain our future in the European Union. I understand why Labour don't want to do it now, and I'm not going to criticise them for doing that. But I think that there is a real danger, if we're not careful, we are going to reduce this country for the long term, not just to the second tier of international relations that this lady was talking about, but to the third and the fourth tier. I honestly believe this is one of the biggest acts of self-harm that we as a country have ever inflicted upon ourselves. I don't think Labour should be going to that place, but I do believe that what one generation did, the next generation has the right to undo, and those children today made me think they should go for it.
Ben.
Well, first and foremost, I think the country...
So he has no solutions to any of this other than just rejoin. Okay, brilliant. Well done. Thanks, Alistair. Okay, that was nothing.
has to leave the EU as one United Kingdom. So the first thing that needs to be done...
So how would you do that, then?
So the first thing that needs to be done is that the Windsor Framework, which is just another form of the Northern Ireland Protocol, needs to be ditched.
Outrageous.
And we need to bring...
Yes, proper Brexit is when war happens in Ireland. Troubles Part 2, Electric Boogaloo, let's fucking go. This is literally it, because these people don't care. I mean, they're just so completely blindsided by this specific vision that they have, they want to implement, that they refuse to even notice any of the negative externalities. It doesn't matter if there's war on the island of Ireland, because they will have got the Brexit that they wanted, and that's all they care about. You're right, Cactus.
1.8 million British citizens back into the United Kingdom, first and foremost. And actually, that would sort out very much everything that's required to be sorted.
Absolute rubbish.
The border is a recognised border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. It's recognised in the Good Friday Agreement.
Yeah.
The trade that goes across...
messed up.
No, you lot messed up.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Trade
Anyway,
that goes
let's
across...
not get into that now, but yes.
Our lot delivered the Good
Hang on,
Friday.
Alistair. The best way, we've got 30 seconds left, so I better let Ben get something
clear
a
on
word
the
in.
border. Leo Varadkar signed...
I mean, maybe. How about we'll go for it, Ben? We'll go for it, Ben. United Ireland in 10 years. Let's go. That's what we want. Fair enough. If his strategy is to ensure that the United Kingdom stays as a United Kingdom, but only with 3 constituent parts, and we have the United Ireland that we so sorely need, then based, I'm down. Let's go.
Simon Coveney weaponised the border. They threatened violence if we didn't put if we didn't put a border down the Irish Sea. And what we've got now is a border right down the middle of the United Kingdom. That is an abomination to me, and it should be to any
Brexit created.
No, which your narrative created.
All right.
And we have to terminate that border. As
Yeah, they're literally how little these people actually properly give a shit about the externalities of the things that they believe. They're literally applauding a man saying, bring on war in Ireland. What the fuck is going on?
first starting point.
I'm afraid that's going to have to be your ending point as well, Ben, I'm afraid, because we've run out of time.
More to say.
So how was that for you?
If you enjoyed this video, please do consider liking and subscribing. It does help out the channel and the algorithm. And if you click the bell notification icon, it will let you know when I go live and when I upload videos. If you'd like to follow me on social media, my handle is @NoJusticeMTG, and that is Twitter, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Twitch, and YouTube. If you want to support my channel in a more financial manner, you can do so by becoming a member for just 99p, by super chatting, or by supporting me on Patreon, with the link is in the description of this video, and hopefully I'll catch you on the next segment.